For the past couple of months, we've been covering all of these specialist characters' backstories, ranging from the characters that are currently in the game to some that were in Black Ops 3, and the reason for that is because Treyarch has put a lot of backstory with these characters into the game. It's just not really in plain sight. In some cases, you really have to dig for it, and as we know, Treyarch didn't put a campaign into the game, so in most cases, it's quite a stretch to find some of these things. However, another thing that Treyarch is known for is putting Easter eggs into their multiplayer maps. In Black Ops 3, pretty much every single map had multiple Easter eggs, whether it has to do with the Call of Duty universe, zombies, or even just random pop culture references. And as it turns out, Black Ops 4 is no different. Once again, most of their maps have plenty of Easter eggs, but even more specifically, all of their maps actually have a hidden backstory that explains the map, the way it looks, and all of the little pieces of aesthetic that are throughout it. Now, sometimes these stories have to do with the overarching story of Black Ops, and sometimes they're just small individual stories that are really interesting. Today is actually both. Today we are looking at the backstory of Contraband, a really beautiful map that takes place on an island. Now, this island is set with monkeys, a shipwreck, and even like these old stone buildings on the far side of the map. But even though this map is beautiful, as it turns out, it has a very dark and kind of disturbing backstory. And it all begins with the ship that's crashed on the beach. And looking at the ship, it appears as though it crashed sometime around World War II to the Cold War in that area. I don't have an exact date or anything crazy like that. But as it turns out, there were a couple of sole survivors on the ship that made this island their home for, it appears, quite some time. Now, the first piece of evidence of this is the hut on the beach side of the map. When you go to this hut, you can see fish remains, you can see canned food, even a bed that designed was somehow making a mosquito net. On top of this, on the other side of the island, you can find some tattered clothes that remain there for who knows how long. Now, for even more proof, if you go back to the crashed boat and go actually inside of it, you can see that there are tally marks spread throughout the wall. Assumably tally marks marking the amount of days that these characters were stranded on this island. Now, upon doing some quick math and a little bit of counting, it turns out that these characters were at least on this island for upwards of 4 years, which is an incredibly long period of time, but to be honest with you, it only gets worse from here. But it's not all bad news. Since we know that the survivors were on the island for so long, there is also evidence that at one point or another, the survivors actually began to thrive. An example of this is a coconut tree being marked best coconuts, and by a certain body of water saying the water is too salty. And of course, the one we looked at before, the hut, showing that they've collected food, and on top of that, they have clearly found a way to fish, as we can see some giant fish carcasses hanging in the hut. Now, if you've looked around the rest of the map, you may notice that throughout the map, there are various chalk markings. Some are very simple, like the markings we see here, and almost look like something that you'd see on a zombies map. Now, at this point, I'm unclear what these are, but they are found several places throughout the map. But then there are also some engravings or chalk writings that are a little bit more in-depth and have a little bit more meat to them. One, for example, can be found underneath the bridge, and it is of course a play on the Dr. Seuss book, One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish. However, this one says one fish, two fish, red fish, dead fish. And they get even darker from here when the next one we see on this rock here says, saw a boat today, passed me by, was it real? So this is where we begin to get the idea that these characters might begin to actually see hallucinations and see things that weren't actually there. Now, the next two are interesting. The first one here that's written on the side of the boat says, fear the water. And then once you go into the water and find a rock, it says, fear the beast. Now, there's a couple of trains of thought to this. First of all, it can be that once again, these characters are hallucinating. Or option number two, if you go off and look into the distance of the ocean, there's one area where you can actually see a shark swimming off into the distance. This could be why the characters are writing fear the water and fear the beast actually being the shark. Now, there is one more writing that is by far the most disturbing, and is this one here. It follows me, always watching, always stalking me. It won't let me leave. Now, originally I thought that this was once again just another hallucination, the characters kind of losing their minds on the island, but thinking about it, it actually makes sense that this includes the shark. Maybe the characters are trying to swim to another island, swim off and find another piece of land, but because the shark is there, they feel like they can't leave because the shark is waiting for them to eat them. But then I found another piece of evidence, almost like a journal, that actually describes who is on the island, how many people there are, and what actually happened. So inside the cabin, there's a piece of wood with some chalk writing on it, the first of which says, Day 5, Frank says help will come soon. After that, Day 143, supplies are running low, Frank still thinks we'll be saved. Day 215, caught Frank stealing from me, he denies it, but I know the truth. Day 245, Frank and his scribbled out football, and then that's all that's written for day 245. And then finally, day 246, which is scratched out, Frank has disappeared, I will eat well tonight. And then finally, day question mark, a bunch of ha-has, and then no one will leave. So this brings up a bunch of questions. First of all, who is the character that is writing this? Well, we don't know a name, but clearly by the end of this, the character is going insane. Also, the next question, what happened to Frank? Well, as it turns out, we can actually figure that one out. If we go to the other side of the island underneath the watchtower and look beneath the floorboards, you can actually find a skeleton with Frank's football laying there. It's assumed that the unnamed character that we don't know actually went ahead and killed Frank. What's not clear is whether or not the unnamed character went ahead to eat Frank after he says, I will eat well tonight, in the writing that we saw before. The one other takeaway we can get from this is that we now know that these two characters are American, because the football that they get lost with is, of course, an American football and not a football or soccer ball. Another theory that I saw, and I think is pretty interesting, is remember when we saw the writing that said fear the beast? Well, what if the beast isn't the shark? What if the beast is actually the unnamed character keeping Frank on the island? This would also make this piece of writing make a lot more sense. It follows me, always watching, always stalking me, it won't let me leave. If Frank wrote this, it would make sense that the unnamed character is actually the beast keeping Frank on the island. And the last thing this unnamed character writes onto the journal is no one leaves, which also fits with the previous writing that we saw. Now, the one other Easter egg that they added to this is if you actually go and look at the bed in the hut, there is actually a volleyball with a blood handprint on it, which is of course an Easter egg to the movie Castaway with Tom Hanks. He has the volleyball named Wilson that looks pretty much identical to this. So that pretty much ends the story of Frank and our unnamed character. Unfortunately, we don't really know what ended up coming of that unnamed character, whether he perished on the island or got saved. It's kind of a mystery. However, this doesn't end the story of Contraband. You may have noticed that on the other side of the map, there are several new boats, cases with weapons in them, and a bunch of newer looking items. As it turns out, a group of criminals which appears to be run by Raul Menendez. Now, if you don't know how that's possible, you should probably watch my Blackout Backstory video, which explains how Raul Menendez can actually still be alive. But in this island, it appears that this is actually an island used for smuggling things. The main thing we're looking at here is what appears to be pounds and pounds and pounds of cocaine. But on top of that, also weapons smuggling. As we can see, several crates filled with various weapons. The ones you're looking at here are Mag 12s or shotguns. But most interesting of all, underneath this chalkboard measuring out pounds of drugs, is this manifesto. A manifesto that we've actually seen in a video that I've done before on the map Hacienda. So if you haven't checked that out already, as we find out, this shipping manifesto is actually leading us to a nuclear retrieval device, which we eventually find out is housed on the map Icebreaker. So just from basically very briefly looking at this, you can see how a bunch of these maps are actually tied together. Now, my question for you guys is, if you enjoyed this video, if you want to see more like this one, first of all, hit that like button. It shows me you enjoyed it, and it shows me that you'd like to see more videos like this one. But also, let me know down in the comments below which map you'd like to see me look at in the future. As I just mentioned, we've already looked at a little bit at Hacienda, so if you're looking for something to watch, you can check that video out. But you can let me me know down in the comments which map you would like me to take a deeper dive at next. And guys, if you like what you saw here and want to stay up to date on all my videos, the best way to do so is make sure you hit that subscribe button and make sure you have notifications on. But guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, peace out.
Maybe you should take it slow.